Good morning. So today we will not continue with Genesis because it's already done. We already had a summary last Sunday, so this is a series break. So there will be two series break. Yeah, before we continue with our sermon series, Corinthians. So today our text is on Romans 1:8 to 16. So it's been a great encouragement for me to be here again. So today we're gonna look into the heart and into the mind and heart of Paul through this letter. So I'll start up with this question. So are you familiar with I don't know with many of you, but many of us familiar with these letters being sent to us by this postman knocking at our door and then gave us personally these letters. It is handwritten. And there was a time na nauso ang scented stationery. Yeah, you remember that? And then people were crazy buying about colored ball pens, stamps, collecting stamps. And there's also this telegram, the blue colored, the naibayad per letter. It's usually used for emergency purposes. Tatay sakit. And then that's an indication that your dad is sick. Uli, go home. So those were the days. And today, people were going crazy again when they receive handwritten letters. Because they feel the sincerity. They feel that the effort is there. They feel the connection. They feel that someone writing it, heart is being poured out into it. So today we're gonna study that same scenario. Paul writes a letter to this church in Romans. Paul never meet them physically. Paul don't plant that church. And it's challenging for Paul to pour out his heart for people to understand that, hey guys, I care for you, I love you, and this is my letter. So today we're gonna study with that. With same as that thought. So basically last Sundays, we don't actually have that opportunity to namnam our 7th anniversary as a church. So during this series, we're gonna look back those 7 years, how God is faithful, how God is continually causes us to grow, how God is continually working into the hearts of each and everyone. We saw people leave. We saw God's provision, putting people. And we saw how God works into the lives of each and everyone. They started as shy people, and now they're not anymore shy. So we experience many as a church, both corporate and individual. God add, God removes. That's according to His will. There are tremendous fruits. You remember those moments that we need to add more Bible study groups? Bible study groups in IT Park, Bible study groups in our main, in Robinsons. The girls were break into more BSG groups. And there were many discipleship sessions. We find people to disciple certain people that we cannot cater more of them. And then there are non-members as well who attend our afternoon class. I hope you remember that. That non-members were excited to join with us as we grow as well in our knowledge towards God. And it is the working of God. It's a huge grace that's being poured out unto us for 7 years. It's a wonderful journey. There's countless moments to thank God upon, season upon season. And now we're in this new season. Once people are single, and now people were getting married. So we witnessed wedding after wedding after wedding. So this is an exciting moment for us as a church as well. New addition to our church. There were new babies as well. Naad sa tong church. You remember that there are only one baby sa tong church, and that's Aliyah. So what keeps the church alive? Obviously, God's keep it alive. But what keeps the local church continually reaping fruits, continually growing, continually pure? It's because people serve. They serve God, they serve one another. But what draws a line between service as how the world defined it and service as how God defined it? You know what? It's easy to serve. Well, I'll tell you honestly, it's easy to serve. If you have this charisma, if you have this eloquent mouth, you have this sweet mouth, it's easy for you to stand in front of here and speak. That's how the world defines it. Sadly, there are people who serve for fame, to look high upon, to appear holy, and sadly, there are people who serve for money. There are also people serve out of fear, out of obligation, wanting to belong, and that's a sad kind of service. They continually push themselves. They continually stretch themselves because they wanted to be validated within the group. We'll have reasons to serve, but as a church, there should only be one reason why we serve. The church today is more committed to being man-centered, entertainment-centered, filled with people that serve you what only interests them. There's also couch potato people. They just love to sit and watch everything that's happened. They don't want to participate, never wanting to get involved. True service is disappearing. Giving yourself is disappearing. And that's just a sad reality. So today we're gonna look upon the heart and the mind of Paul. We're not gonna study the issue in Romans. But what we're gonna do is dissect into the heart of Paul, how Paul is trying to explain his heart to these people who don't know him, or even just heard about Paul. They don't really have personal encounter who Paul is, the heart of Paul, the concern of Paul to them. So we're gonna look into that because in our previous study, we saw Paul as bold, dynamic, confrontive. How dare you, Galatians? But here, we're gonna study as Paul as loving, as warm, as gentle. We will saw Paul as a teacher, and also we will saw Paul with a heart as a shepherd. So in relation to serve, Paul has been raised as Judaism. He knew the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the chief priests, the elders, the in and outs, the mechanics, the formality, the routine. He grew in a Gentile world. He knew the priest, the pagan's god. He knew that these people worshipping this pagan were worshipping him out of fear because if they don't do it, calamity will strike them down. Paul is very familiar with those kind of service. So if you talk about service, Paul knows both worlds. So, but through the ages of the church grows, developed, flourished because its people were serving. All history of the church is filled with memory of noble, devout, sacrificial Christians. Some were unnamed, some were unknown, but all gave their lives in service to Christ. So a bit context of Romans 1. So this letter of Paul to these Christians in Rome. So this wasn't his church. He didn't found it. He never met with them physically. Paul wrote this letter while he was in Corinth, while he was on his third missionary journey. So the epistle to the Romans was written to Christians residing in the city of Rome. Rome was the center of the empire, was ethnically diverse. So it is unclear how the church began, but the church grew. And the best explanation is that the Romans were present at Pentecost. So they were mentioned at Acts 2 verse 10 to 11. So the city of Rome was predominantly populated by Gentiles, so it is expected that the church was composed of both Jews and Gentiles. So let's go and dissect this verse. So let's start with verse 8, 9, and 10. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed in all the world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you always in my prayers, asking that somehow by God's will I may now at last succeed in coming to you. So two things that we can saw here. Paul has this concerned heart, and also Paul with a heart of gratitude. First, Paul started rightly. He said, I thank my God. Notice the word my, there's intimacy, there's relationship. Some people in the context of Gentile world, or you're in a Jew, this is something medyo effy sila. Because they call God as my. There's relationship, there's intimacy, close daimo. In all letters of Paul, he always start with the heart of thanksgiving. And we know except in Galatians. Paul started in the right place. He didn't thank the Romans. Thank you, Romans. Yeah, you're growing. I heard about this news about you. You're striving there. Or he didn't start it by tapping his back. Thanks to me that I'm zealous in preaching the gospel from one place to another and then it reaches to you. Paul never do that. Paul knows that this is God's ordained work. He knows where all thanks should be placed. He knows that everything is from God in doing service. That's why he started with, I thank my God. And it's very important that Paul started with thankfulness and acknowledging that it is God. It is the working of God. That this is God who do all the details, that these people respond to the beauty of the gospel, that these people were growing, that these people were bold, that it came to the attention of Paul. A thankful heart is essential to do spiritual service. If you are trying to serve the Lord without gratitude in your heart for what He's done, you are serving in flesh. Everything will be external. You cannot serve one another if you are not filled with gratefulness. Di ba, we stay away to people nga di taganahan. We don't want to serve that people. We want to serve those people close to our hearts. We want to serve those people whom we have relationship with. And in the context of service, without those thankfulness that fills our heart, that causes our heart to overflow, without it, we're serving externally out of obligation. I do this because I need to do this. I need to do that because I'm commanded to do that. And I want you to understand as well that when Paul wrote this letter, he is in Corinth. There's a plot to kill Paul. And he starts with letter with thankfulness. I don't mind all those death threat that's rushing towards me. My heart is filled with joy and gratitude and thankfulness, for God is working mightily through the lives of people, these Christians in Rome. And Paul is setting a great example, no? Of stretching ourselves, dying ourselves, giving ourselves away. While he's writing this letter, There's a plot to kill him, yet his heart is filled with gratitude and concern. He is always longing to serve more than himself. So with a heart of gratitude, there's no room for bitterness. There's no room for self-promotion. What a beautiful picture of a church that each and every one were there filled with thankfulness. There's no room for bitterness. There's no room for comparing yourself, measuring yourself towards one another. I do these things more than you. I extend myself more than you. Now, how dare you? Don't do this to me. What kind of service is that? If the church were serving through that external, through flesh, what a disaster. It takes only one moment to trigger everyone. And then the church, boom, spreads out. But if the church, their heart is placed into that heart of gratitude, to the heart of concern, there's no room to measure yourself up to others. You know where to run. Up. My God. And in verse 9, for God is my witness, whom I serve. Where? With my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you. So Paul served with my spirit. Dito yang hugot. He served with my spirit in the gospel of his Son. It is not flesh, not external, not obligatory, not legalism, not without fear, but in the spirit. He served in spirit. His fuel to keep serving is what? The message of the gospel. You know why people serve? Because they acknowledge that they cannot give something if it is according to their flesh. It's easy to give when our supply is everlasting. That it will never run out. If you get a supply from a big God, from a huge God who created everything perfect, holy, gracious, merciful, and that's your source, that's where you get your heart towards service, what beauty it is for a church to give more, to stretch out their self more. Because when we get it from our flesh, nothing will happen. We will start thanking ourselves. We'll start be concerned more about ourselves more than others. So Paul laid the foundation first, that it is God whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you. It extends to other. So remember who Paul is. Killer of Christians, and then road to Damascus, God opened his heart. Now he is a Christian risking his life to serve God, putting all his love to God and God's people, showing to them the same compassion, grace, love, mercy that God gave to him through Christ Jesus. It is remarkable that as we study this verse, we don't see Paul. This is Paul. This is the trademark of Paul. But what we saw is Christ working through the life of Paul. So Paul is saying here, I am serving, not because according to my flesh, or I am serving just like how those pagans serve God, how those Jews serve God. I'm serving because of Christ. And that's where everything flows. And next is concern for these people, that without ceasing, I mention you always When I redundancy, no? Without ceasing, and then there's always. In my prayers, asking that somehow by God's will, I may now at last succeed in coming to you. So there is this concern to these Christians in Rome. You know what happened to them when they're under Emperor Claudius? Claudius is persecuting these Christians, wanting them to be expelled city because they're preaching about this guy named Christos. Na mali pa siya o dungog sa Christ, as what his historian is claiming. And then they're continually serving God amidst persecution, amidst those physical threat na i-expel sila sa Rome. And then Paul is so concerned with them. He always mentioned them in prayer. It's hard to pray as well for someone if imong heart is not there in the right place. You cannot pray for someone if your heart is bitter. Show me a person who served the Lord grudgingly, who served the Lord bitterly. I'll show you someone who doesn't serve worshipfully from the heart, because a worshiping heart is a thankful heart, no room for self-promotion. Paul heard about their growth, pray for them always. And there's a desire for Paul as well to go to Rome. So let's continue. So verse 11 to 15. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I don't want you to be unaware, brothers, that I had often intended to come to you, but thus far from being prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation both to Greeks, to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish, so I am eager to preach the gospel to you always who are in Rome. So we saw another points here to look into the heart of Paul. His loving heart, his willing spirit, and his eager spirit. Paul longs to see them. His longing is rooted that he wants to meet with them, to teach them, to preach them more about Christ, so that they may be strengthened or established. Christ is all that we have more than anything in this world. He continues with mutually encouraged. I want to preach, and also I want to learn from you. Notice the heart of Paul. I don't want to do all the talking. I want also to hear from you, so that I may be encouraged as well. These Christians here in Rome, as we know, were facing persecution. They wanted to be Paul wanted to be established in their faith, preach Christ more and more, so that amidst all this persecution that surrounds them, they will hold unto Christ more and more. And that's the desire of Paul, because he loved this church. And notice his next prayer. I don't want you to be unaware, brothers, that I often intended to come to you. Paul knows the need of this church. They need to be established. They need more of Christ. And then Paul said, I want to go there. I want to be with you. I want to preach, teach. And what a heart of Paul, is what we saw here sa letter. Paul is saying, I received something from you too. A humble teacher will always say, let's learn together. There's heart of humility. To be humble means simply to consider the needs of others more important than your own. Jesus humbled himself also to meet our need. So Paul prayed for them. He prayed that God will send him to them, that he can serve them in preaching or teaching, to strengthen them. This is Paul saying, I volunteer myself. If this is in accordance to God's will, I want to go and be with you. I want to be used as an instrument. If it's according to the will of God, Paul is saying, I'm willing to do it. I want to go there. So the question now is, are we to go? Or we just wait someone to keep pushing us for us to go? Paul saw the need, and he has love for these people, and he wanted to go there and meet that need. And Paul continues that there's often intention to come to them, but oftentimes prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. Paul continues to reap some harvest. There's a rise of plantito and plantita today. We're talking about a fruit-bearing tree right now. You plant that tree with the aim of what? Just for its aesthetic? You plant that tree, you put it in a good soil, you labor daily for that tree, you trim it down, spray some chemicals so that pests will not eat that plant down, keep that plant healthy, keep that plant in good condition, so that the fruit that will come out from that tree is good. And this is Paul is saying that I want to go there. I saw the need. I volunteer myself because of one thing. I want to see fruits and harvest fruit. You know what's tragic? When I preach, the end of my preaching is just to preach. I lead Bible study just for the sake of leading Bible study. I do all these things inside the church, serving one another for the sake of serving. And here Paul is saying, I do all these things because I want to reap harvest. The end is fruit. Paul labored himself to the point of physical threat, persecution, because he wants to see fruit. He wants to see those people not just growing in faith and established, but Paul wants them to bear fruit so that others will benefit from that fruit and they will continually serving one another. And what a beautiful picture of that church. Individually, they're bearing fruit for their brothers and sisters, edifying one another, strengthening one another. And then the church as a whole, they're bearing fruit because of Christ. And then the people outside watching that church, they're bearing fruit. Their service is different from what I know what service is. I work in an office. We have this KPI, key performance indication, and there's a way to reach that. And if you're really brilliant, there's a manipulative way to control that number just to reach that. And here, you saw in a church, they're serving not because they want to reach something. Numbers, fame, money. because they want to grow. There's fruit. They're living organism. They're not just mere human being. Paul is saying here that it is Christ who works in me. I thank God for that. And God will continually work as well as how God is working through my life. It's the same God who will work through you. And I'm excited to see harvest. And what beauty it is to be part of this ministry, to be part of this church, to be part of this service, that everything is according to God's divine will. No human effort. It is God who strengthened Paul. It is God who causes Paul to have this loving heart, concern, gratitude, willingness. And it's God who causes the other, whom being served, to grow and be established and later on bear fruit. Paul is not tapping his back. Thank you, Paul. But he said, thank my God. He put it right in the first place. It is God. We saw the result, but it's still God. We saw the church loving one another, serving one another, but it is not us. It is God. And Paul is emphasizing here that it is God whom I serve. It is God, our master, as we serve. And it is God who causes this fruit to bear fruit. And we take part of the harvest. We found joy. God allows us to delight as well in those things. And for 7 years as a church, we witnessed that. We've been with so much grace. We've seen grace working into the lives of each and every one. Grace overflowing. And that's the harvest that we've witnessed through the life of each and every one. And what beauty it is to continually serve. We serve because we want to be God's channel, the broken vessel, for people to have this greatest spiritual gift, which is Christ. We labor with them for them to be established and for them to what? To bear fruit. So I hope you see the working of God from start to end, not from us. What blessing it is to serve then. The question is, are we willing to go? Paul is continually pouring out his art here in this verse. Verse 14, I am under obligation, both to Greeks and barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. So I am eager to preach the gospel to you, also who are in Rome. There's eagerness. I see the need. I want to meet that need. I volunteer myself. I want to start now. Let's do this. This is what Paul is saying. And he said, I am under obligation, both to Greeks and barbarians. So the Greeks, these were the elites, the educated. The barbarians were considered as uncultured, uneducated. Paul is saying, I owe them the same responsibility to both. I want to reach them all. He's eager to reach these people. He is eager, though he is aware about the threat, the persecution. He is eager, though he knows what awaits him in Rome. You know how Christians view, people in Rome, Christians view Christians? They view Christians as cannibals because of our communion, the blood and the body of Christ. They thought that they're cannibals. They thought as well as we're atheists, the Christians. And then Paul is eager all the more to go there and preach to these people about Christ. and render service to them. And in verse 16, for I am not ashamed for the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jews first, also to the Greek. You know what, Paul? You want to go here in Rome? You know how they view Christians? Like this and like that. Paul is saying, what to be ashamed of? I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Paul is eager. Not just is eager, he is bold to go there. What a tragic thing it is, no? If you have that eagerness but you don't have the boldness to face these people. So people in Rome thought Christianity as cannibalism, pagan copycat, superstitious. So it's obvious that in Rome, people will despise Paul and his message and Christ. But this is not new to Paul. Most of the time, it cost him his life as he spread this message of the gospel. So we saw here, Paul served with his spirit. He was bold and eager to preach out of a great depth to God because he desired fruit. And all of this was born out of thankfulness, concern, willing, submissive, loving, humble heart, and he was unashamed. And if you find in your life shame for the gospel of Christ, and if I find in my heart shame for the gospel of Christ, it just reminds us how far we are away from the heart of true spiritual service. So what do we see here? As Paul continually dissecting his heart towards these people, wala kailaniya, and then people reading this letter, this is Paul. He has this great concern for us. He has this heart of gratitude, concerned heart, loving heart, willing spirit, this eager spirit. His intention is pure towards them, both the Greeks and the barbarians. And as they continually read this letter, it will continually remind them of one person, which is Christ. And this is what Paul is continually preaching to them. So what has to do with us as a church? So for 7 years, it's a long journey, no? And we saw people serve, and we saw people we remove intentionally from service. And we saw people continually loving one another in a biblical context. All Christians are called to be engaged in service to Christ. True love is always measured in what it gives, not ever in what it takes or wants. So I would like to read to you 1 Peter 4:10. You don't have to go there. I will read it to you. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as stewards of God's varied grace. We all have this gift. Before the foundation of the world, God predestined us for salvation. And also God predestined us to give this gift. And what a blessing that God gave us unique gift for the church. And I hope you will use that gift. You will continually use that gift to serve one another as we continue in serving one another in this local church. We learn rich through the life of Paul in service to God and his people. And as a church, let us be reminded why we serve, the heart of being a servant, and to whom we are serving ultimately. So now the question is, are we continually serving in spirit or in flesh? As a church, we continually fight this desire to serve in flesh. We always remind ourselves that we are not doing this for ourselves. We are continually praying that our intention is always pure, that we always do this an act of worship toward God, that we will not do this to get glory as well, because we believe all the glory belongs to God. So as we continually serve, are we serving out of obligation or out of concern, out of love, out of gratitude, with a willing and pure heart to truly serve one another? And also, I hope you see the need in the local church. Just like as Paul, with a thankful heart and a concerned heart, he saw the need of the church. And what a good way to start from there. And then Paul volunteered himself to the power of God as well, sustaining him, strengthening him. And it is also my prayer that God will continually steer our heart, eagerly, continually saying, I volunteer myself. This is all for God. And this is an overflow of our gratitude for what God has done into our lives all throughout this year. And as a church for 7 years, sustaining us, showing us grace upon grace, and also in our personal life. So I hope you learn something from these verses as Paul dissects his heart towards these people.